SIP episode 104. Tonight's topic, regenerative farming. But it is so much more than that. It's love, it's romance, it's passion, it's traveling the world around vineyards and working harvests in two hemispheres. And then you settle down in the Napa Sonoma region to produce some of the best limited production wines you can imagine. Welcome to Accenti. SIP episode 104 is here. All right, my name is Martin Cody, co-host, co-founder of Cellar Angels, a direct-to-consumer wine company exclusively focused on wines from limited production producers in Napa and Sonoma. And if it is Friday night, SIP happens. So in honor of one of tonight's guests, I'll let you guess which one is from Italy. Many of you know we got a new coffee maker. I've been having these things all day long. They're so cute. I've had like 7 of these in the last hour. So I don't know what is in them, but they are powerful and tasty. Have you wine club members been clicking on the QR code for the canteen? Changed again today. And speaking of wine club, you have 3 weeks left. If you are not in wine club, why not? It is the best wine club in the United States, different producer each quarter. And the library club has extra special perks, like getting to meet the winemaker and getting behind the scenes up close and personal. But I want to talk to you if you are new. The folks this evening refer to themselves, the guests refer to themselves as sipsters. And many of you may or may not know what that actually means. So the sipsters in this vernacular are very near and important to us. They are what we refer to as exceptional supporters and wine ambassadors. They are eudaimonic. And now you may not have heard of the phrase eudaimonic. It is again Greek in origin. Much like hero, EU meaning good, daimon meaning soul. They are good souls, these wine people. They actually are exceptional supporters. They go out of their way to support these limited production wineries. And how do they do that? These are the telltale signs of a eudaimonic person. They are a pursuer of excellence. They are seeking to develop a skill and or additional knowledge, i.e. wine knowledge, which is why this is called SIP Virtual Educational Tasting, seeking to express and inspire the best version. And that's what winemakers do each vintage. And they're interested in doing what they believe in, and they believe in supporting limited production wineries. That is what we are here for. We are the conduit to that. We consider it unbelievably important. And I want to show you, many of them are drinking tonight's wines in advance. And they're doing that because they have gone to the Cellar Angels website and grabbed this little item right here. So this is the SIP kit. There's a marketplace on Cellar Angels. You can buy wine 24/7, 365, and you don't have to buy a SIP kit. But if you like these shows every Friday night and you want to participate with the winemakers and the owners and the vineyards and the special guests that we have, grab a SIP kit. And then you'll be set for the next 4 or 5 Fridays in a row. You can sit back, relax, and enjoy learning about their craft and tasting it as they explain what is in the bottle and what is in your glass. So please, tonight we're going to be looking at a Pet Nat and also a Cabernet Sauvignon from tonight's guests. And I want to introduce them to you right now. Ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, please welcome Lorenza and James Allen. Right on cue. That's incredible. Cheers to both of you from Seattle this evening. So thanks so much for taking some time.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
happy weekend.
Happy weekend is right. So you are winemakers in California and you're in Seattle. Business or pleasure?
A bit of both. We were here for business until today, and we're spending the weekend with family here in Seattle.
Oh, outstanding. And what's the business purpose?
We actually, we have a friend who makes wine. We have a couple friends who make wine here. I used to live here. Yeah, checking in with them, pre-harvest checks on things, and some other slightly more confidential business that may reveal itself in the future.
I like the tease. And hello to Scotland, who actually met you in person at this vineyard behind me.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going, Scotland?
And interestingly enough, Scotland is one of those wine lovers who appreciates opening up 2 bottles a night. It doesn't matter what night, Sunday night, Monday night. And so when on SIP, when we open up 2 bottles, it's been affectionately referred to as the Scotland. So we have teased out this evening is the Scotland because we have 2 bottles open. And so I would love for you, James, I'll start with you to talk about kind of your wine road. It is really, if we could quote M. Scott Peck, it is the road less traveled because you kind of grew up in the Midwest. So how did you get involved in wine, and when did you know, yeah, this is actually really cool. I want to do something serious with this and maybe make it a career?
Oh, I still don't think of it too much as a career. It's more of a, I don't know, just get to do things I love every day. And it was more of a, yeah, stumbling through various passions until I found one that ended up being monetizable in some way. So I started basically in high school. I was a avid home brewer even when I was like 14. And
Really?
yeah, I just really loved home brewing. I had a friend who had a kit, and we would do it like every weekend. And just loved fermentation, loved, recipes and that sort of thing, and all the magic that comes with yeast. And then I was working at the Missouri Botanical Garden doing a lot of botany related things with the press there and the new, orchid discoveries and things like that. So that was a lot of exposure to the plant world. And so when I went to school, I focused on a horticulture degree. So it was definitely all beer at the time. Yeah, I think we maybe made like one batch of wine from a kit that was just like, you get some juice, and it ends up a little bit off usually. So it's
Right.
a little bit of homebrew wine, I think. But we so I ended up getting into horticulture, and very quickly I stumbled into a brand new program at Colorado State University, which was I was in the horticulture school, but it ended up being the first. A friend and I were the first to graduate with the concentration in viticulture and enology. So
Super cool.
yeah, it was great. I just went out. Yeah. Yeah, I should stop reading these. It's distracting, but it was a really cool experience because we got to see kind of a fledgling industry. We got a German viticulture professor and a enology professor from Penn State, and I realized this was a new program and they didn't have everything together yet. So I headed west in 2007 and did a harvest in Northern California, working with a lot of really cool vineyards. And I got to work with like Tocolon and Alder Springs and all these famous vineyards and get exposed to how you treat really, really good fruit. And also got to love driving a forklift and all the fun stuff that comes with working in a cellar. So it's
interesting because you had to be everybody's best friend in high school. You're 14, 15 years of age, and you've got a home brewing kit making beer. So I imagine that did not go unnoticed by some beers.
Yeah, I think it was probably a little before it was legal to drink them, but if they're going to go bad, you have to drink them before you turn 21 sometimes. So.
Exactly. Now, Lorenza, I believe I've always had this romantic theory about Italy and people who grew up in the wine industry there, where wine and olive oil were probably put on your pacifier when it fell out of your mouth and then put back in at some point in time. So share with us a little bit about your wine journey and how you came to the industry.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's true. When you're from Italy, you are exposed to the wine from every corner, and I was exposed from a very young age, even before James. Actually, I remember my father having Moscato at home, and I would get to take a little sip when I was like 10 or 11 because it was sweet and low in alcohol and bubbly, and I loved that. But I never thought I would get into wine until much, much later, because I actually thought I wanted to study medicine, and I stumbled across the University of Winemaking by chance. Someone totally randomly told me that it existed, and that just felt like a sign. I was like, oh, a university where you can study about food science and winemaking? I'm all about it. And so I used to live in the city. That's where my family comes from, and no one had anything to do with wine before me. And the idea of moving to the countryside where the university was great. So I moved to Alba, which is in the heart of Langhe region, where Barolo and Nebbiolo come from. And I never looked back. So I completed my bachelor degree in Alba, and I did a couple of harvests in Piedmont. And then after that, I joined the Vinifera Euromaster, where I met this one. And
So now what is that organization? Say that again.
Vinifera Euromaster. So it's a
Okay.
master in winemaking and viticulture, sponsored by the EU. And the first year is everybody together in Montpellier and a month in Bordeaux. We were 30 people from 22 different nationalities, and we had professors from all over the world coming to give us classes. And then the second year, we got to decide where to go. I decided for Portugal, so I did a harvest and wrote my thesis around Lisbon, and James went to Germany. And then after
So now
that,
this
Yeah, go ahead.
university, what is the requirements to get in?
Well, there are a lot of people applying, and it's not really easy to get into it. I think mostly it's good to have already a background in winemaking. We had a
Mhm.
couple of people that had marketing or economics background, and they definitely struggled because there is a lot of science.
Sure.
And
But there were some people who came, there were a few people who came from the admissions department did a really good job at finding interesting characters. It wasn't just a simple like, do you have a science degree
Yeah.
or have you
Right.
worked in wine? Like there was one guy who, a friend of ours that has been on set before, Vintraverso, he had never really, he just worked a couple harvests because he grew up in Napa Valley, but he was a big, he was working in the State Department, you know, it was just like foreign service. So he came in,
Right.
he had to work really, really, really hard to catch up with everybody. But it was possible. It was really cool to have that diversity in the program.
Yeah.
See, and that is super cool from a small world perspective, because for those of you that remember Miliavaca Winery and Vintraverso that James just referenced, larger than life personality and extremely funny, very, very passionate, grew up in Napa. But it's interesting. I've never even heard of this university. And I see a fellow Ram on here, Sean, who also, they did not have this viticultural class when we were in college in the 80s in Fort Collins. So that's unfortunate. There was different classes outside curriculum that dealt with fermentation and hops that we had a lot of homeschooling in. But other than that, nothing formal like this. So that's fantastic that CSU has moved on. And I think it's great that you both attended a university in France and Montpellier to further those studies. James, I'm curious, you left or you graduated CSU with this degree and you decided to pursue this in Europe, and where was that decision making and what caused, I mean, that's a huge leap.
Martin, I got to say that there's not enough time to cover the time between. There's so many things happened because once I understood that you could use this profession to travel and basically work 3 months for harvest, you never have time off, but you make some decent money, and then you have 3 months off until the next harvest in the other hemisphere. It was, you can just perpetually travel. And so I did that for at least 3 years between graduation and going to Vinifera. I think it was actually 6 years between. So I worked in all, like, so many wine regions in the world. I think it was like Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Washington State, a couple other in California. So I actually met a random South African guy in Melbourne who was staying at the same hostel who told me about this program, and it was just total serendipity.
I was just going to say serendipity. Absolutely. And we say it all the time. You guys have heard the phrase. I mean, wine brings people together. This evening is no different, and great wine especially brings great people. And so you're right. It's sharing stories, someone telling you about the program, and you think, all right, if I can do this for a living, that sounds great.
I mean, yeah, does anything about that program sound like it's a bad idea? It was basically Winemakers summer camp, but you worked hard enough that you learned. Like we definitely left with this amazing knowledge that we share now, which is really helpful in the decision-making process in the vineyard and in the winery. We, you know, even though we did different theses and had a lot of different experiences, it's really helpful to have this kind of baseline, and having gone back to school after working in a few wineries was really helpful because I had always wondered certain things. So
Right.
Getting a deep knowledge or research perspective, because a lot of winemakers, they just have to work on trial and error and they don't have time to read all the scientific papers. So having a mix of that is, I think, extremely important. And it's almost nobody we've met in the wine industry has that mix. It's really rare. And I'm not saying it's the best way, but it's the way that we really like to make decisions.
No,
Educated, but also artistic with it.
well, I think it's also fantastic and unique because you have the classroom, but also you're able to augment that with the application hands-on in the vineyards, and to be able to do it in multiple hemispheres and then go back to the classroom and bring into the classroom. Well, here's what happens in the real world. This is the textbook is fine, but this is what I've learned. So that's a huge advantage to be able to bring both sides of that to the studies and to learn and enhance the craft. So congratulations on that. So then you both graduate. Lorenza, you go to Portugal. James, you go to Germany. And why Portugal, Lorenza?
I was actually choosing between Portugal and Germany probably had a better program. But I just could not live in Germany. Just couldn't do it with the weather. It was just not my place. And I was really attracted by Portugal, by the lifestyle, the weather, Lisbon, and
maybe the wine too. I'm not sure.
the wine is absolutely great. And one of my favorite professor, advanced viticulture professor, was in Lisbon, and that's also the professor that I ended up writing my thesis with. So that was
okay.
I enjoyed.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And James, why Germany?
I don't mind the weather too much. I think I don't know. It's great.
You went to school in Colorado, so the snow or the cold, not a big deal.
I mean, if it's snowy or gray outside, it's a good reason to have a nice big, dark beer.
Exactly.
I had actually worked there in 2013, so I think 4 years before that, and I have a very good friend and mentor who has a winery there. That's like, Prost. It's a third generation winery, and I worked the vineyards with him and farmed with him. And made wine with him, and it was a really, I don't know, I just met some really great people, and I'm really deeply obsessed with Riesling. So it's funny. Riesling, obviously, in the United States gets a little bit of a redheaded stepchild persona with it, because largely I would attribute that to the blue bottle in our refrigerators that our grandmother drank since 1965 to 1995. However, and it might have been the same bottle, by the way. However, it's interesting when you speak with wine professionals, specifically, master somms, court, all those folks, if they do that desert island bottle of wine question, and it's, what bottle of wine would you want to have on a desert island? The statistics are staggering. 9 out of 10 of them always choose a bottle of Riesling. And when most of the folks know, we owned a wine store in Chicago for 7 years. And when we would turn people on to good Riesling, not the Riesling that they kind of grew up with, they were spellbound. And it is so food friendly and extremely versatile. And so I commend you and share that passion, because boy, what a great region to study some of the greatest wines in the world. So that has to be fun. And I think it has to inform a little bit about the portfolio that we'll get into in a second. But bring us now, fast forward. How the heck did you both end up in California?
You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot going on in California with wine, and it's a giant magnet for winemakers that's hard to resist sometimes. I basically got paid to do a really cool thesis on the vineyards at Silver Oak, and I was so that brought me to Napa Valley, and I kind of got stuck there working. I started working at Fela after that, and
Bummer.
Sorry, yeah, it's a bummer.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was that was a really huge learning experience. It was basically the opposite of the master's program, where they don't talk about science there. It's all like what Aaron Jordan learned from the Rhone, the Northern Rhone, back when he was there, and it's all about the farming. And it's I was working the vineyards, and it was my rule with the job is if you're still learning, keep going with it. And so eventually, after the fires in 2020, that was Lorenza had moved here by then. She was working in the wine industry starting in 2019 in California. And we were ready to take the leap eventually. And so when I left Fela, we were like, oh, this is our chance to move to Sonoma County, where things are a little different.
So when you
with what we're into. So
when you were writing, just quickly, I'm interested, when you were writing on the vineyards of Silver Oak, were you doing Napa and Alex Valley?
Just Napa, just Coombsville, actually. It was a precision culture experiment.
Interesting. I like it. So then you decide to move to Sonoma and build a brand together.
Yep.
What came first, the brand or the romance?
Well,
The romance. Yeah.
The romance was in Europe.
No,
What?
actually,
No, actually,
no romance.
no.
It was total friendship until she moved to California.
Yeah, during the master's degree, we were just friends, and we stayed friends for 5 years, and then we met again in India for one of our friends' wedding, a friend from the master. And by then, I was living in Australia. I lived there for almost around 3 years, and I wanted to do a harvest somewhere else. And James was like, well, if you want to do a harvest in California, I'm gonna help you, like. And so we started talking, and then I ended up moving to California for one harvest. And then he proposed basically a month after my arrival, and I
did not plan to do that. That was not in the plan, I promise.
That's not the most romantic thing to say, James. You should say, I was planning that for years. I knew she was the one.
No, man, the most romantic thing is spontaneous love.
That
It's
is true.
Some previous plan. It was something, something just clicked. And then it was like, oh, we should probably spend the rest of our lives together.
just friends. Yes, Jeff.
Jeff and Jane. And by the way, this vineyard might have special meaning for that proposal, if memory serves.
Yeah.
Let me do real quick before we get into turning cameras on the first poll question, because I want to talk about the Pet Nat, and you guys can't answer the question.
Okay.
So after release, Pet Nat tends to get drier or less sweet over time. True or false? I'm starting you off with the softball. The second question is more advanced. And we have a very strong honor system, Lorenza and James. If I see anybody pick up a smartphone, they immediately get terminated from the session. Now,
from the session after that.
what we're going to do is we're going to reveal the answer in a little bit, but then whichever one of you two feels emboldened to answer why the answer is the answer, we will be happy to let that happen. So we're going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, 2 people, 2 renegades, 2 people went on a limb and it cost them because they are wrong. The answer is true. Pet Nat tends to get drier or less sweet over time. In fact, you could take a bottle and put it in the sunshine to accelerate that process. But I'm curious, James.
Or a garage.
Or a garage. Hence the term garagiste, I think, is from Pet Nat. Lorenza, why don't you tell us why it gets less dry?
So Pet Nat, basically you bottle the wine when it's still fermenting. So at the very, very beginning, and it captures all of the aromas of fermentation. And with that, it also captures the sugar that it's in the juice and the yeast. So the yeast keep fermenting while in bottle, consuming the sugars and transforming it into alcohol and CO2. That's why less sugar and the bubbliness in the bottle.
I love it. What I also like about it is that each bottle can be different.
You can, yeah.
We're all drinking different versions of this right now. It's kind of cool.
I know, that is super cool that we're all drinking different versions of this. Okay, question 2. This one is a little bit harder. If I can find it. Which of the following, in honor of our guest, Italian wines are made from dried grapes? Verdicchio, Ricciotto, Fiano, Valpolicella. How was my Italian?
Great.
You are the best liar. That is awesome. I literally had to Google translate one of these words.
Which one?
I can't tell you because that might give someone a hint. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All over the board. Now, for fun fact, this was a WSET level 3 exam question. So for the folks that got it right, and there are 7 of you, consider yourself advanced wine students. It is option B, Ricciotto. Or how do you pronounce it, Lorenza?
Ricciotto.
Okay. And this picture, I think, has always, or this process, and you guys, lived it and studied it, is incredible. So why is it the drying of the grapes so important in this process, and what does it do to the grape, James?
Yeah. I answered the other one.
I think the one word that explains it all is just concentration. So water evaporates, the rest of the compounds that are in the grapes don't evaporate. So you end up with a lot more richness, depth, concentration, and a wine that has a really high amount of tannins, which helps the wine age and become very interesting over time.
Well, and I was fascinated too by reading and studying this a little bit, that you have to wait by law a certain amount of days before you can actually, after the drying process, which is interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the portfolio. And since we have the Pet Nat in our glasses, and Pet Nat, by the way, has been made long before champagne was made. And I'm interested in why you decided to do it, and tell us about this one and what's in it and why it's fun. And I'll let James start.
Oh, this is mine. All right. This is a very simple wine and a very complex.
Lorenza went like this, James.
Did you?
No.
I wouldn't be surprised. No, it's a little bit, it can be a traumatic wine to make, because it happens, typically have to do it in the middle of harvest. Like the most of the work happens in the middle of harvest, even the bottling. And it's the only wine that I think you would bottle in the middle of harvest. Everything else you bottle when it's more convenient and less crazy in the cellar. So,
Right.
there are definitely pros and cons from a lot of different angles, but I think essentially, Pet Nat is just, like Lorenza said before, you're locking in a process that's in the middle of happening into a closed environment. And when that process finishes, it leaves, instead of the CO2 just going into the air from a fermentation, it's staying in the bottle. And so that pressurizes and carbonates the wine. And it's a really difficult thing to do. You have to bottle at the exact right moment of fermentation where there's just enough sugar left to give you the amount of bubbles that maybe a champagne would have.
Right.
But not so much that you make every bottle explode. Literally we were, every time I put a cap on these things, I was like, I hope no one dies.
Don't say that.
No, but the thing is
very accurate with our work.
This was probably the most, we took it to the lab a lot. We did a lot of analysis to make sure that it was the right grams per liter of sugar when we put it in the bottle. But you definitely talk to some people like our friend Elise, who her first Pet Nat was a bunch of little bombs, and luckily it didn't mean the bottles exploded, but it was enough that when you tried to open it, it just gushes and gushes until like a lot of the wine is gone. So we're always concerned about that, and we basically, without getting super geeky on this, I think it's interesting if you think about the day that we bottled, a lot of things had to happen. We basically had planned to make a Riesling Pet Nat. Sorry.
I was just do you go into harvest and say, we're going to make a Pet Nat, or is it a game time decision based upon walking through the vineyards and figuring it out?
Both. It can be both. In our case, we knew we wanted to make a Pet Nat, but we were not 100% sure on how that would have looked like. So in this case, when we pick the Riesling, the numbers, we always pick very early. And for the Riesling, we pick particularly early. And so the numbers were just perfect for a sparkling wine. And so we thought it was a great idea to set.
And by numbers, you mean sugar and acidity.
Yes, exactly. So, you want high acidity and low alcohol in a wine like this. At least that's our aim. So in this year, we set aside a barrel of Riesling because we thought it would have been great to have a Riesling Pet Nat. And then fermentation started to slow down in that barrel for whatever reason. It happens. And meanwhile,
we don't add yeast, so we end up with a lot of different types of fermentations, and sometimes they're less strong, and you can't necessarily trust it to finish the job when it goes into a bottle.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So you're just throwing caution to the wind.
Well, we utilized a couple strategies to give ourselves some insurance.
Yeah,
Good.
one of these strategy was blending. So meanwhile, we picked our Barbera. We made a Barbera Rosé last year, and that was rocking through fermentation. It was going great. And so we decided to do a 50-50 Riesling Barbera Pet Nat. The day of bottling, which is yeah, I know, it's an interesting combo already.
Yeah.
So, but you know, we were sure, we were very confident that aromatically it would have worked. And then the day of the bottling, you know, harvest is always very crazy, and we had everything ready to go, set up, and you have to chill down the wine in tank so that it's not too foamy when you bottle and you avoid the loss. But I don't know if it was because we chilled it too much or for whatever reason, it just slowed down. So fermentation was not getting to the right number, the right amount of sugar that we wanted.
This is at like 11 p.m.
Yeah, it was.
And we have the bottling line set up. We have the glass, you know, the empty glass ready to go. And it's like a Wednesday night during harvest.
And we had to work the next day. So we have to get started.
Let me ask you this, and James, you first. Scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love bubbles?
Like 12 or 13.
Lorenza, same question.
Yeah, same.
All right. So now, knowing that your combined score out of 20 is 26, do you find yourself working harvest where that cognitive bias towards a fondness for bubbles is influencing any type of decision making where you're like, you know what, we could make a Pet Nat out of this one, or we could make a pet, you know, where you kind of guide yourself into that direction because you both love bubbles so much?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's always, because it's just us and we don't have employees or anybody that we have to like manage. It's really freeing in terms of game time decisions. We can make some crazy choices that work out because it's just us executing them instead of having to, you know, pass it down a corporate ladder or something. So
right, decision-making chain.
Yeah.
Well, so the biggest question for both of you at Harvest is how many audibles we're going to call and what are those audibles in sequence? Because it seems nothing will go to plan per se, because it's Mother Nature and everything. Like you just talked about, Lorenza, all of a sudden the fermentation slows down and that you hadn't planned on. So now what do we do?
Yeah. And the really simple solution there was we already had some Verdeo that had finished fermenting. So to lower the sugar content to the amount we needed to make the right amount of bubbles, we just added some of that to the blend. So, and the cool thing about it is it ended up being like a story of our careers in a bottle, because you have the Verdeo where she went to her, you know, master's in Portugal. You have the Riesling where I went for my second year. And then you have the Barbera, which is from her home region of Italy. So it's a really cool, like it's a blend that we've never had before. And it ended up being a really cool combination.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever seen such a blend before, so it's definitely unique.
No, that's awesome. And by the way, earlier, a few minutes back, James mentioned Elise, and many of you know Elise Nearlove from Elkhorn Peak. So that is who he is referencing, also a Pet Nat lover. And if you would like to turn your camera on, Mission Control is allowing that functionality to occur. So this Pet Nat, you just hit upon it. You're right. It's incredible. I mean, Riesling Barbera Verdejo, it's extremely refreshing. And I'm curious, how much did you make of it?
Just 50 cases,
Yeah.
so 2 barrels basically.
Outstanding.
And about,
I love it.
Most of it's, about 2/3 of it is gone now. And it's funny because it tasted really good out of the gate, but now it's like, we just tasted this for the first time in 3 months, and it's changing. It's really cool to see how it's evolving. And it used to be really tropical and like pastry dough, all kinds of like yummy, like fruity, sweet things. Oh, hey guys. I see a lot of familiar faces. How's it going?
That is awesome. Hello, Julie.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of this, and it's almost, and it grows up so fast. So you release this little infant into the world, and now 3 months later, it's already driving. Pretty soon it's going to college. And I mean, it is evolving almost in the glass, but I love the cloudiness of it. I love that it's, you know, not crystal clear, and it has some funk to it in a good way. Just an unbelievable blend. Super cool. Speaking of
one interesting point on that is that sediment, that haziness is super full of B12 vitamins. So you know, if you do that and then eat some French fries, that's basically a hangover cure right there. It's the perfect, you know, potassium, B12. It's like you're taking a supplement and just drinking at the same time.
So it's the perfect complement on Monday morning meetings so that you can have I'm a big fan of this already.
Yeah. We won't be offended if you put a little bit of OJ in there if it's a Monday morning.
There you go. And so it's a good opportunity to talk a bit about Jeff G's favorite thing, Google Earth. And we're going to talk about regenerative farming because you talk about the Pet Nat and the different vineyards. And so one of the things, and I have I forgot to put this up earlier. Hold un momento.
I should have mentioned that my thesis was on mapping vineyards. So I have spent so much like unhealthy amounts of time on vineyard maps and on Google Earth. And it's a really handy tool, actually. It's like someone's taking free pictures of our vineyards for us from the bird's eye view. So we can use it to spot parts of the vineyard that are in need of help.
Well, and it's interesting because I want to talk about regenerative farming because I grew up on a farm, and this you can date back and trace throughout history to nomadic times, to Roman times, and everything where they would plant the same crops in the same areas, and they had to keep moving because after, years, the soil would stop producing the crop yields that it once did. So they would move. And I'd be interested, Lorenza, first how you decided to get into regenerative farming and when you got bit by the regenerative farming bug.
I think in our situation, it was a matter of necessity. So this whole brand was started because we had the chance to start farming one vineyard in Napa Valley. We're up to 5 now.
It was this vineyard. It was the
Usher Vineyard. And
the one behind me.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when we started farming these vineyards, they were not in the best shape. They've been neglected, or people that used to take care of them did not really know what they were doing. So our role was just to make the vineyards better, and regenerative farming it's exactly what it does. So it takes care of everything around the vine. Not only our aim was not just to get fruit or just increase the amount, but to increase the quality of the final product, but also of the vineyards. And so working with, we believe in dry farming, so not using irrigation whenever possible, cover crop, and we do everything ourselves. So that makes it hard, but also easy to take decision. We don't have a tractor, it's just James and I, and we treat every vine as if it was a bonsai, and that really shows. So I believe our wines are getting better and better every year. Talking about the Cabernet here, because Cabernet is the vineyards that we farm, and we see it in the vineyards too. They're getting better and better every year.
And James, why was it important to you?
I'm always trying to balance and find a bridge between more of like a natural perspective, hippie kind of thing, and science, because I think sometimes they don't talk enough. Those two schools of thought. Oftentimes the people who pay the researchers are industry and trying to maximize yields and profits. And luckily Colorado State has a really balanced program about this sort of thing. So I started learning about organic agriculture, and regenerative is basically organic plus. I mean, it involves organic farming. It really helps to farm organically in this model. But that really, organic is just a piece of the puzzle. You're really just talking about not spraying synthetic things on your vineyard. But regenerative farming is way more comprehensive and all-inclusive. Yeah, we purchased some fruit, Patrick or Peter, and then we also we farm all the Cabernet and we purchase the rest, basically. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's a good question because I want to show people a little bit about the Cabernet Vineyard. So this is all of us.
Beautiful picture.
And this little spread right here was Michelin star worthy. And it was incredible because we don't just take you to a private tasting room. You are in the vineyards with Cellar Angels. And so James and Lorenza took us up to the Usher Vineyard, and it is extremely high up. And They will probably have still begged for forgiveness on the way down because I was going a little fast, and hopefully that did not come back to haunt them. I see James nodding. But this was an unbelievable morning shoot up there. Just spectacular. That vineyard is super, super cool. And we lost our main talent, one of our talent, but I want to show you
fetching the other talent.
I want to show them a little bit about the steepness of this vineyard, and to give you guys there we go. Ivy is the happiest person right now in the world.
Scotland was asking about Monty, so here it is.
So here's the Cabernet Vineyard, and you can see all of us down in the shade. But this gives you an idea of the steepness of this vineyard, but also how high up we are, because Napa Valley is down here and we're up about 1,200 feet. And it was a little bit warm, but these two, champion on. And I'm curious with regards to Peter's question a little bit here. You farm a few of them, you buy the grapes from some of them. How do you pick which vineyards you want to farm? And because I think the regenerative piece is extremely important, but I would love to I'm curious how you determine, okay, here's one that has fallen on hard times, or this one's going to be a 7-year project. I mean, that's a huge undertaking. How do you go about that?
Well, for what concerns the Cabernet Vineyards, mostly was...
They pick us.
Yeah, exactly. It was word of mouth. It was, we didn't start this brand thinking that we will make a lot of wine. We started this brand because we love farming. We love spending the time in the vineyard. And so we got the chance to start farming this one vineyard. And all of the vineyards that we farm around Napa Valley are not ours. They are other people's vineyard that the owners don't really know what to do. And word of mouth with just being given this vineyard to take care of. So we farm them and we get the grapes in return. And then the other vineyards were the vineyards that we acquire fruit from, like the Riesling, the Verdelho, and so on. All of them, each of them have a different story. So
they basically, I think we generally try to follow opportunities and serendipity whenever possible, because that usually results in the best wine. If you try to force, if you're like, oh, I really want to make a Sauvignon Blanc, and then you go looking for Sauvignon Blanc, you're going to find the lowest hanging fruit, which is not always, you might find a vineyard that nobody else wants or something like that. So just being in wine country, we're able to have some conversations and find good opportunities. And over the years, we've actually found some opportunities that I can't even believe. I've only hunted down one vineyard, and that was the Riesling. Because I tasted an older version of the bottling, and I was like, I have to know where this vineyard is. This is the best Riesling I've had from Northern California. We're going to find this. And 6 months later, we're getting the fruit. So
super cool. And it's another one of those examples of the serendipity of the wine industry, where a rising tide, I think that quote actually may have originated in the wine industry, because at the level of the limited production winery, for the most part, everyone is trying to help each other out. So word of mouth travels quite quickly with people that are quality people. And it's nice to help someone. And I mean, you worked for Aaron, you both have great contacts in the Valley. It's easy to see that people are fond of the two of you, and what is in the bottle is actually stunning, which leads me to believe, or leads me to want to talk about, the Cabernet has got a label called Thereafter. The Pet Nat has got one called Accenti. I get confused easily enough. Talk to me about those two labels.
So
sorry, 1 second. Can you still hear us?
Yes.
We have someone's mowing the yard next door, so trying to fix that. Okay, sorry.
Could someone go get the mower?
Thank you.
Take down the lawnmower.
So Thereafter is the label that we started with when we were just making it at the winery where we were working after hours, and it was our moonlighting project. When we became more serious, when we decided that this was the real thing that we wanted to do, then we decided to change the name, and we went for Accenti, which is an Italian word, and we wanted to make it so that it something that we want to convey with our brand that is it's global. So we believe that every wine has an accent. Accenti means accents in Italian. So depending on where the grapes come from originally, which terroir they're grown on, and who farms them, so the traditions and the technique, all of these different elements give the wines an accent. And because both James and I have a lot of experience abroad and in different countries, this is what we want to convey.
I like it.
Every time we're making a wine, we obviously have to draw on what we know about that wine. And sometimes it's a lot, like Cabernet Sauvignon. Obviously, you know, that's a pretty common grape, and we have all had a lot of Cabernets, and you have ones you hate and ones you love. And there's, you know, we really have an aversion to new oak. Anytime it starts to stop being a framing component and more of a center stage, we have a big problem with that. And then, you know, when there are more obscure varieties like the Verdeo, which is from the island of Madeira off of Portugal. And we actually, you know, Lorenza has some experience with it, but we also had to contact our friend who makes wine there and say, what do you do with this? Like, what's your strategy? And she was like, oh, let's make sure it's the right form, the right clone. Does it have small berries, small clusters? And we're like, yeah. And okay, it's good with skin contact. So we did a little bit more of a skin contact and maceration. The images on the labels are they're generally based from an artist from about 1900 named William Horton. And we've just stumbled into these labels.
Or his art.
Yeah, his art in general. And we love the idea of just a kind of iconic, simple art that draws you in and gives you some imagination. And honestly, that's what we want to do with our wines. We want them to be simple enough to be approachable and clear what their identity is. But the more you look at them, you might let your imagination run wild a little bit. So our wines, I think across the board, all of our wines, when you first taste them, they can appear simple, light, fresh, and they don't overwhelm any food you're eating. But then if you take a moment and you know, we sometimes keep a bottle of our Cab in the fridge for 2 weeks, and we just sip it throughout and find all kinds of new things in it. So if you make it well, you don't need to make it big. And so that's kind of, it just happens to agree with the imagery that we found from William Horton.
Yeah, black and white. Yeah, most of some of the labels are exactly the art that he made, and others we changed it. For example, the Pet Nat is basically a collage of at least 3 or 5 different labels. We wanted a floating castles, and then we took different elements and we created a floating castle. And the logo, both Accenti and thereafter, is an artist from Mexico.
I'm going to put that up there. There's your floating.
Yeah, and the Pet Nat, it's hand stamped. The red written Pet Nat is we do that by hand for each bottle.
See, that's a labor of love.
Blood is ink.
Yeah, our blood is ink. Exactly. That's from the thorns.
Yeah.
Let's go to Google Earth, because Jeff is texting me that if I don't get to Google Earth soon, see, he's upset. We're going to walk through Vineyard Selection. So the neat thing about what James has sent me is that I can hit play and it will just walk through where the vineyards are. So the vineyard, the Usher Vineyard for the Cabernet, is the vineyard behind me over my shoulder. And this is where a certain proposal that was serendipity took place.
Actually, that was the real wedding. The
proposal. Oh, the real wedding. Oh, yep. Wait, there is a proposal story that I remember.
Yeah, different story. But on this vineyard, we in the middle of harvest, we had an Australian friend get certified with the Universal Life Church to be an officiant, and we just did it.
We got married with a couple of our friends being our witnesses, had a bottle of bubbles, and then went back to work the day after. But it was a very fun evening.
So now, why was this vineyard in need of regeneration?
I mean, as you can see, it's a very steep slope with a lot. Actually, it's interesting to see. So that you can kind of, even in this image, you can see the vineyard to the right is that's farmed by Longmeadow Ranch, and it's still organic, and there's still some spots in it that are kind of rough. And that can just happen in a mountain vineyard sometimes, but they use a lot more irrigation and fertilization. And this vineyard to the left, the 2 blocks to the left, the close to the pool, and then on the slope down below. Yeah. Those are the vineyards that we farm. And it's essentially the biggest problem with this vineyard was a lack of organic matter in the soil and not getting enough focus of where the growth is. So they would just kind of let it grow however it wanted. And so it would become a little optimistic when it was wet, and then when it got dry, it had too much green, too much foliage, and it would be overly stressed. So every vineyard is a different situation. Or I'd say regenerative farming takes a lot of intuition,
Right.
but essentially one of the biggest things about organic farming is increasing the life underground and the ecosystem around the vine and the organic matter, because that allows the vine to live through crazy situations. So
Yep.
high water stress, heat waves, frost damage, all sorts of things. So that's the big thing there. And so every vineyard has a little bit of a different story there, but that's it's a long conversation. Generally, usually it involves cover crops of different types, and specific cover crops depending on if it needs nitrogen or if it needs more organic matter and this sort of thing.
Well, no, and I think you're right, because the ecosystem phrase is the one that should resonate with people, and it's above ground and below ground, and oftentimes much more important below ground. And when you stress it, and those of us growing up in the Midwest, yes, they rotate corn and soybeans because of the different nutrient needs of each, but after a while, they have to let some fields grow dormant or fallow because the soil won't support it. And then you can dump chemicals on it, and then it's just a zero-sum game, and that's what we're seeing in a lot of places around the world. Walk us to where we are going here, the Rockland Vineyard. Super cool vineyard.
Yeah, so this is just to the right is Grace Family Vineyards, which is a really cool, actually to the right of that even more. That's Grace Family Vineyards, yeah. And so this was a neighbor connection. We farm a vineyard in Calistoga that it's called Grant, you'll see next, I think. That is, he just happens to know this guy, Dick, and he has this vineyard that he used to farm it. Now he's 90 years old and he doesn't farm it so much anymore. So he usually was taking care of it to the bare minimum. But as you can see, it's a terraced vineyard on a slope. So these are, it's basically it's terraces, it's steps.
Yep.
And there was a lot of erosion problem. He was using Roundup to suppress weeds because it's way cheaper and easier than weed whacking. So we understand that, but this year, actually, yeah, this was planted before terraces were an issue in California.
Exactly. Yep. And
So-
this slope now would probably be illegal.
Yeah, it's definitely getting there. It's not as bad as like Via Dare and that sort of stuff, but this is or Newton, yeah. But there's
Right.
definitely erosion issues there.
So Usher, we kept it as a single vineyard because it was our biggest vineyard, and then all of the other Cabernet Vineyard, Rockland, Grant, and Stanton, Stantons have 2 different vineyards in it. They follow under another label called Three Gardens, which is the other Cabernet that we make. We used to call it 2 Gardens at the beginning, and then we had another vineyards and we called it 3 Gardens, and then we had more vineyards and we stopped changing the numbers. To answer Peter's question, the Cabernet appears to model Portuguese red wines. Was this the intent? No, it wasn't. I never had the luck to try a Cabernet from Napa from before Robert Parker's area, but who had our wine told us that our Cabernet reminded them the Cabernet that used to be grown and made in Napa.
Yeah, like the
back in the
1970s.
days. Yeah.
Right. The Heights Farm and some of those.
And it's actually interesting in Napa. That's the 80s is when they got irrigation. So we dry farm all of our vineyards.
Interesting.
Which allows us. It basically the vines have they decide to enter a different phase of growth earlier. So they think that harvest is coming when you don't give them artificial water. So they typically become riper physiologically and flavor ripe before a vineyard that's irrigated. So it means we can harvest earlier and have a more moderate alcohol like 13.5 and not 16.5.
Right.
And still have the same maturity of the tannins, the same flavor characteristics or better. And so it means that we have an elegant Cabernet that also has depth, complexity, and ageability.
I love it. Tell me about Grant.
This is a problem child vineyard. This is probably the most difficult vineyard we have. It's as you can see, there's some big trees because
huge amounts of shade. Yeah.
The owners really don't, they are absolutely opposed to pruning those trees. So we work a lot to balance this vineyard. The rows that are closest to us here, actually, this picture was taken with a lot of cover crop. You see how how fluffy that looks?
Yep.
That's so we planted a lot of cover crops, but we changed the types of cover crops depending on where in the vineyard we planted them.
Sorry, someone asked if it's a requirement that the properties we farm have a pool. No, and I wish we could use them.
I might have swam in the Usher pool a few times, but
yeah, that's mission control who's staying focused on all the important things. A pool.
Yeah, people like their pools and their vineyards in Napa, and then they don't use either. So it's just a differential cover cropping that helps us farm this vineyard, and a lot of handwork.
Tons. I can tell already with that shade. My goodness. Moving on.
Karen, the cover crops, there are lots of things to say there, but just very simply, there are two types. There's the types that bring nitrogen into the soil, like legumes, peas, that sort of thing, and then clover. And then there's the type that's more designed for either like breaking up the soil, like a daikon radish, or producing a lot of organic matter like grasses or barley. So we use a blend usually, and we find different mixes, different percentages depending on what we need.
Well, now in this one, it looks like the vineyards have been well attended, and it also has the requisite pool.
It does.
Yep.
Yeah. This is the Verdeo vineyard from Tom Morgan. He's been his father lives next door and farms walnuts. He's lived there for his whole life, and he's seen a lot of changes, but this is some of his neighbors are old Portuguese immigrants, and they gave him cuttings that they had brought in their suitcases.
Back in the day.
Love it. Love it.
And so this is the real stuff. This isn't like from UC Davis. This is just, neighbors helping neighbors. And we used to get Sauv Blanc from this vineyard, which is a really cool Musquet clone, very interesting Sauv Blanc. But once we found out we could get the Rodeo, it was a no-brainer. And so we're actually about to harvest that in 8 days.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. Looking forward to that.
We make multiple wines from that. It's a really fun. We get more fruit from there than anywhere else, so we can play with it in different ways. We make 3 different wines.
And this next one?
Our Carignan, Redwood Valley.
Carignan, yeah.
Yeah, these are pretty old vines, and yeah, we started working with these vineyards. I mean, we've been in contact with the Colombini family for a while, because back in the days, James was working with their fruit at Fela, and the fruit was always incredible. And so when we had the chance to start working with the Carignans, we took it. And this year we're also gonna make rosé from the Carignan.
Wow.
Yeah,
I love it. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that Carignan's not very well known to a lot of people, but in California you can find some of the oldest vines are Carignan. So it's a treasure trove, especially up in Mendocino County and Contra Costa County. So this is a really special vineyard, and we're so lucky to get it. It can do a lot of things. It can be, for people who like Pinot, it can be light, fresh, very food pairable. But it also, if you want to dig into it, it's more like it has a depth and richness, almost like a Merlot, but with a little bit more high tone acidity. So it's a really cool wine. We make this into our village wine, which is it's just designed for by the glass and table wine, work with whatever food you make.
So answer,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Lorenza.
So I just want to answer Hans' question. So we work with different vineyards of Cabernet. So we had the Usher, Grant, 2 different vineyards in Stanton and Rockland. These are the ones that we farm ourselves, and we do everything. And then we work with vineyards that are not us. We don't farm it. We just have, we just work with the growers. And that's the Verdeo, the Riesling, and the Carignan, and the Merlot at this stage.
Well, and Carignan is, James, to your point, you don't see a lot of it. And what you genuinely see on store shelves is South American. But when you find a good Carignan, it doesn't have that green pepper component, but it has that nuance that you were talking about that is refreshing. It has depth. and the quality to price ratio is fantastic. And so I'm excited to try this from you.
For sure. Yeah, we're really excited. We just bottled it. And Kiefer was saying the villages, the Grenache we had, the last version of this was from the Colombini Grenache Vineyard, which is very close to this. So we made a Grenache into this type of wine. And then we had an ability to get the Carignan, which honestly, if you've had a red wine anywhere in the south of France, chances are it was Grenache or Carignan. Those are the two main grapes you see.
Yep.
And so we, studying in Montpellier, if, it's poor students just buying a bottle from anywhere, that was what we were drinking all the time. So rosé or red wine, it was I don't want to call it a workhorse because it's a little bit better than that. Like it has a really nice, it can be an ageable wine. But it's amazing with so many situations. And it's if you can imagine like any French food you want to eat, this works with it.
Yeah. The only challenge I see with this vineyard and really this entire surrounding area is I don't see a pool. But other than that, it looks super cool.
You're right. This is one of the only non-pool vineyards. I think this is the only non-pool vineyard. Huh.
We'll forgive them because I'm looking forward to that. I mean, like Scotland's right. That village was amazing up on the mountain. All right, Bedrock Merlot.
Yeah. Well, they don't have a pool either, I think.
Well, hang on. I don't know what this is. That's a pond, pool, pond would be good for me. That looks like it would work.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we can jump in. It's fine. So the Bedrock Vineyard, we started working with them in 2020. So they used to sell their grapes to Constellation, and then 2020 Constellation dropped them, and then they decided to.
So like Mondavi or whatever Constellation brand it was going to.
And so they decided to start working with smaller brands and just allocated some of their fruit to smaller brands. And we were lucky enough to be one of them. So we started with a couple of tons of Merlot, and we love working with them. They do an amazing job in the vineyard. They absolutely know what they're doing. And when the fruit arrives to us, they're always impeccable. And we'll be working with them since.
Super cool. And I love the fact that they split it up to a couple different smaller producers and you guys get to get your hands in the soil and do your magic. So, and boy, there's something about great Merlot coming out of Napa Valley. We don't see a lot of it per se. I mean, Cab is king, obviously, but when you can find a fantastic Merlot, it just stops you in your tracks. So I'm looking forward to tasting more of this.
Merlot can be such a great wine. It's sometimes not the easiest to sell because there is kind of a stigma.
There might have been a movie about it.
There might have been.
All right, Riesling time. Look at that little hillside terrace.
Yeah, this might be the prettiest vineyard.
It's a beautiful, beautiful vineyard. It's in Fountain Grove. As James was mentioning before,
Fountain Grove is not a well-known spot. It's basically at the northern tip of Sonoma Valley where it meets Russian River Valley. So it's right at the town of Santa Rosa. And from this spot, which is really high up in the vineyard, you can actually see straight through to where the Pacific Ocean is. So the breeze comes from the Pacific every afternoon and blows on this spot. So it's really special because it doesn't get too hot during harvest time. Yeah,
so James and I are obviously huge lovers of Riesling, but we've always dreamt to make Riesling, but we kind of were skeptical about California Riesling because there are not not great examples coming out of California, personally, I believe. And then we found this bottle at Bottle Barn, which is a big shop for wine in Santa Rosa, and we were crazy over it. And James chased down the producer, which by then stopped making wine, but he gave us the contact of the grower, and we started a relationship with them. And now it's the third year that we work with them.
All right, you've got to rein me in on the portfolio because I've got, and maybe this is another one of those audibles and game time decisions. It's like, let's grow the portfolio because we've got access to this fruit, and you become a little bit of the mad scientist. We've got Barbera, we've got Riesling, we've got Pet Nat, we've got Cabernet Sauvignon, we've got Merlot, we've got Carignan. I mean, give us Lorenza, I want you to give us an overview of the portfolio with Case Productions.
Okay, so currently we're making around 1,000 cases of wine. We tripled production last year because it was a good moment and it happened and we were spontaneous. We didn't really think about it. We had the opportunity and we did it. And we're very happy because with this amount of wine now, we can enter other markets and not just sell to our small niche. And for what concerns the different wines, we have Cabernet. Whites, we have the Verdejo, Riesling, our Pet Nat, and then we have the Rosé, the Carignan, and the Merlot. At this stage, this is the wines that we're making. We made a Barbera last year. We're not gonna make it this year, but we're looking
because we had to pick that fruit ourselves out by UC Davis, and
it was a lot.
almost killed us.
Picking grapes with like 100 degrees outside, it was just the two of us plus a friend for 10 hours straight is something that it's a lot. So
no mas Barbera.
No mas. We would love to do it again, and we're actively looking for an Italian variety to add to the portfolio again. Barbera might be one of them, where I would actually love to have Nero d'Avola, even though it's not from the region where I come from. It's from Sicily in the south of Italy, but I do believe the Sicilian varieties in California really have a great expression. So
great.
that might happen soon. Yeah.
Well, I love the fact, and James, you hit upon this earlier, that you didn't really think of this as a career because you're having so much fun. And that's one of the keys to making the distinction between a job as work and a job as a vocation and passion. And clearly the two of you are extremely passionate about what you're doing and having a lot of fun. And it is absolutely stupendous and outstanding for all of us to be able to taste the fruit of your efforts. How about that pun? Did not even write that. It's not even on the teleprompter. I'm sorry, we don't have a teleprompter.
Oh, you gotta
anyways, we have to get one of those. Yeah, Mission Control is my teleprompter. So I do want to thank you both for taking the time. I know you're working out in Seattle, seeing some family and some friends and some business. So it means the world to us, and the Sipsters appreciate it. And I think Sipsters, you can agree on just how important it is to vote with your pocketbook on supporting these small limited production wineries. You guys are all exceptional. And I know you can buy wine anywhere. And when you buy it on the Cellar Angels marketplace or through the wine club, it just means the world to us. It means the world to folks like James, Lorenza. And quite honestly, I think we're all better people as a result. There is no better beverage to consume than wine. James' high school experience may differ at 14 brewing beer, but I think he's matured. And I'm glad he has. James and Lorenza, any final thoughts?
Can I just thank everyone who came out to visit? It was so fun to host you all, and it's good to see you here again. And that was really fun. It's one of those, like, I don't want to call it post-pandemic, but like the hump it's a moment where we had a chance to do that, and it was really fun to see you all and to spend time and share something we love with you. So if anybody else is thinking about visiting the Sonoma area or the Napa area, let us know. We'd love to host you, and it'll be it's kind of a moment to kind of stick our heads out of the situation and say, oh, there's people out here, and they can drink our wine too.
Honestly, one of my favorites, we love making wine, we love working in the vineyards, but communicating this and connecting with other people through wine is definitely my favorite part of this business.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, you two, for your generosity and gracious hospitality that day in the vineyards and this evening. I wish you both a wonderful, safe weekend and safe travels back to California. And to all the Sipsters, you guys rock. Thank you so much for the support. Cheers. Be good to one another. Let's continue this. See you next week. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Cheers.
Bye.